So today we're looking at a self-defense book that was written by two military veterans, both with special forces backgrounds. Hi guys, my name is Joe and welcome to Fighting Words, the martial arts library. On this channel I review martial arts books and talk about other martial arts related subjects. The subject of today's book review is Common Sense Self-Defense, 7 Rules That Can Save Your Life, for Men and Women. The authors are David Garcia and Stuart Smith. And the book was published in 2002. At the time of publication, regarding the authors and their backgrounds, David Garcia had served in the Marine Corps Special Forces as well as the U.S. Army Special Forces. He was also, at that time, a police officer in Maryland. His martial arts background included a first-degree black belt in Taekwondo, an instructor certification in Krav Maga. He also had studied Jeet Kune Do as well as the SCARS program. His co-author, Stuart Smith, was a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, and he'd actually authored several books on Navy SEAL fitness. And you can find his full author profile at Amazon. Can't really find much on David Garcia there. Now, the format of this book, it's divided into 7 rules, and they are all given their own chapters. And in addition to the typical instructive format, it also includes numerous sidebars. So those sidebars are meant to highlight important points that aren't otherwise covered in the instructive text. Chapter 1, rule number 1, is use your head. And the chapter itself is sort of vague. I think it primarily serves to sort of let one know what to expect from the rest of the book. It does offer up some ideas like, learn how to use verbal de-escalation and actually try to avoid physical conflict at all costs. Second chapter, rule number 2, is avoid danger. Now, the bulk of this section goes over specific scenarios and how to prepare one for safety in those scenarios. So the scenarios will include things like what to do if you're at the ATM, or how to deal with a road rage incident. I think this section is generally good. I think it might be the strongest part of the book. I will say something that I dislike about it is its use of negative language. In other words, don't do X. Okay, well, you tell somebody not to do something, it's worse than telling them what to do instead, as far as how the brain functions. So, for instance, in the home break-in section, it'll say, don't let strangers into your home. It'll give a paragraph description about that. And, there has to be a better way to word that. Avoid letting strangers into your home. This is a small point, but I do think it's an important point. Toward the back of the chapter, it goes over verbal and nonverbal avoidance guidelines. In other words, it gives these bullet-pointed ideas for dealing with people who are exhibiting aggressive behavior. I think this could have used some expansion. Some of these seem a little contradictory because on one page it's like, agree with the attacker and converse with them and try to come to an understanding. Okay. And then on the other page it's like, tell the attacker no and be assertive with that. Both are good advice, but neither gets enough expansion to tell you under what circumstances to use one or the other, because you can't use both at the same time. So, yeah. Again, I do think this is probably the strongest chapter of the book, although I think it could have used a little bit of expansion and perhaps a little rewriting in some cases. Chapter 3, again, covers rule number 3, which is know when to use force. This is another generally good chapter, although, again, I think it could have been expanded upon. I say that a lot, but the book itself is actually under 100 pages long. In Chapter 3, we get into things like legal considerations as well as the offensive mindset. The offensive mindset in this case being, don't try to shell up and be defensive, but just keep attacking. One thing they do note is to not engage an armed attacker unless you have to. I sort of thought that that went without saying. Chapter 4 is knowing how to hit. And this lists a series of 12 techniques. Most of them are strikes. Pretty much the only thing that isn't is biting. A lot of these are weapons that you would typically find, like, the hammer fist. You get the finger jab, elbow strikes, open hand strikes, a few different kicks, including a kick to the groin and sort of a low roundhouse kick, although you mentioned impacting with the top of the foot as opposed to the shin, which is what we would typically see in arts like Muay Thai or Dutch kickboxing with the low round kick. Each of these weapons is given its own little paragraph. Sometimes these include some training ideas. For instance, one of the techniques is a cupped strike to the ears. They say don't actually do that in training. Instead, use your opponent's shoulder as a target for that. And with most of these techniques, we're also given a list or an idea of some of the targets to be hit with that. I would say lacking in this chapter is anything covering stance or actually power generation. Hitting hard is good, but if there's no instruction on how to hit hard, I think it sort of detracts from it. Chapter 5, rule number 5, knowing where to hit. This chapter includes this little chart that you see here that will have the weapons against corresponding targets, and that's pretty much it. Chapter 6, rule number 6, is knowing how to fight. In this, we get responses to 12 different types of attacks. Now, the attacks can range from, grabs, in some cases simple threats. There's also a mount escape, defense against multiple attackers is addressed. Some of these tend to be very pain reliant. For instance, the mount defense relies entirely on causing pain, as opposed to using proper leverage. Rake his eyes and slap his ears. Okay, why isn't he controlling your hands? There's not even anything in here as simple as a break away from a wrist grab, as far as, like learning to roll the hand toward the thumb, which is the simplest way to get out of a grab, and you don't need to hit somebody to do it. Actually, their defense for a wrist grab is to poke the guy in the eyes. Which may or may not be an appropriate response, depending on the environment and the level of force needed. Also in this chapter is a sidebar on improvised weapons that I think is pretty good. Chapter 7 is training for self-defense, their final rule. And this briefly goes over the importance of fitness. Sure, one of the authors basically makes his bones on fitness books. Not a bad idea. There's no negative thing about being fit. Except maybe you don't get to eat ice cream as much. But, okay, yeah, being fit increases your survivability. Good idea. This also goes over some of the impact training tools like, focus mitts and the heavy bag in order to train some of these strikes. As far as the pros go, I think the general information is pretty good. As I said, I think it has a really strong section on avoiding danger and, addressing all those scenarios. I think it could be improved a bit, but I do think that in general, that part is very good. I think the sidebars are informative. I might modify some of the attacking tools it has in there, but I would generally agree with most of them that they have. As far as the negatives go, as I mentioned, it's vague in some places. Again, the book is under 100 pages long. I think it's under 90 pages long, actually. And it really could have been expanded in certain sections when it comes to, things like how to use verbal de-escalation. Again, there was that sort of contradictory agree with the opponent and then tell them no. Again, both are good advice under different circumstances and used in different ways. And I wish that the authors had expanded on that. Perhaps that wasn't the deal they had with the book company. I don't know. I'm also pretty critical of the fact that a lot of the escapes rely on causing pain. They don't really address the grabs in any meaningful way. Again, the arm goes around your throat. Deal with the arm around your throat. Like, give him a hammer fist to the groin. I don't know, maybe. or maybe he just locks up, the arm around your throat and pulls harder because he's upset now. I've got a whole rant on why we shouldn't rely on pain-reliant techniques. So there are definitely things that I would have done differently when it comes to this book. As far as recommendations go, I think as a self-defense book, number one, it's going to be pretty cheap. It is brief, and I do think a lot of the principles are good. Again, especially the chapter where it's going over the various scenarios. I would generally endorse most of the striking tools they decided to use. I think that those things could help accommodate someone's self-defense program. I think a lot of the escapes would be ignored or should be ignored. I don't think they're very good. I think they rely more on pain and, frankly, the opponent maybe not reacting in a logical way. So I would ignore that chapter entirely. Some of the other things I think, are okay to form a foundation for a self-defense program, or perhaps to help supplement a self-defense program. Anyway, that's all I have for this week. Thank you guys for watching. If you liked the video, please leave a thumbs up. If you want to see more reviews like this, I do long-form videos every Friday. Most of the time they're book reviews. So you can subscribe if you'd like to see more of that, or just listen to me rant a little bit about martial arts stuff. If you would like to sponsor a book review, or just generally help out the channel, please consider donating to my Ko-fi account. I'm going to put a link to that in the description. And that's all I have for this week. Thank you very much.